BoogeyMan band coming round the bend. Is BoogeyMan band? Is BoogeyMan band?
Greetings, fellow Fright Fiends, and thanks so much for dropping by the Horror Zone channel. I hope everyone's doing well. Today's video is something I've been wanting to do for a while now. I just haven't had the time because I really wanted to make this special for people that were going to check this video out. So about a month ago, my good friend Sam Straub, one of my Salem's Lot minority buddies, the other being Danny Evans, of course, gifted Danny and I with this amazing shooting script from Salem's Lot. But what I'm going to be doing today is going through and talking about moments in the script that were not in the televised miniseries. Things that were either changed or scenes that were longer, different character expositions, different introductions to some of the main characters. So I hope everyone enjoys this, and afterwards I'll come back with my final thoughts, and here we go. So the first thing, we're going to start right at the beginning. So this is when they're in Guatemala at the church. The first thing that I noticed is that there's other people within the church. Now, in the miniseries, you only see Mark and Ben, and they're getting holy water. That is pretty much the scene. You know, they're getting holy water. It starts to glow. They realize that there's another vampire that's found them. In this one, there's a Indian sexton who is there, and he sort of directs them where to get the holy water, and they pay him. Now they go back toward the entrance of the church, and at the front they fill small vials with holy water. The sexton is there, and a coin falls into his hand. So that was a little bit different. Everything else in the scene plays out exactly the same. The next scene that stuck out to me, and I talked a little bit about this in my quiet little tribute of Salem's Lot dedicated to Barney McFadden, because it has a little bit more exposition for several characters, especially Ned Tebbett's character. So in this scene, this takes place after Ben leaves the real estate office, and Bonnie tells Crockett that Cully's going to Portland tomorrow. That is in the script. Harkins gets out of his cruiser and leaves Noli in the driver's seat. You see Ben's car disappear, and then Straker, is sort of watching out the window. And then from Straker's point of view, Crockett is coming out of the real estate office. So Crockett is leaving the real estate office, so you see him leaving, going over to the antique store. Gillespie walks up to Crockett, but says that the plates are from Colorado, and Crockett says that, yeah, he's trying to rent a house. Something fishy about him, and then Gillespie's like, well, what is it? And he's like, I can't say. Think he's lived here before. New Railroad Street. But, Crockett thinks there's something strange about him. Gillespie's like, kind of the same thing. They both are kind of suspicious of Ben. And then as Crockett is moving towards the antique store, Ned Tebbets is driving by, and Crockett flags him down and asks him to fix a leak today. And Ned says that he can do it about 5:30. And so there's a little bit more interaction between these characters who really don't have any scenes together in the film. So I thought that was really cool, and I wish that would have been kept in the film if it was indeed shot. Now the next scene is when Ben and Susan meet at the park, and this one stood out to me because I feel like the meetup between Ben and Susan in the park in the miniseries was a lot more playful, and here there's moments where it's almost like it becomes combative. It was really interesting to read this. So some of the things that jump out is almost like Susan is surprised that he sits down, because he just says, hey, can I sit down? And she goes, hey, and then he sits down and takes up the book. And then, of course, she asks him, why'd you call it that? And he said, did you read the book? And she's like, I'll read it. And he says, you don't have to. And she's like, I want to. He says, and then he goes, I'll bet you wouldn't have finished it. And Susan goes, wow, are you defensive? That wasn't in the miniseries at all. And then Ben goes, wow. And then Susan angrily says, wow. And then the whole thing where Susan says, that she, what her name is and where she works. And she says that she had taken his other book out of the library, and he asked what the title is. She says, I don't remember. And then she adds, are you neurotic? And he said, medium. How about you? And she says, medium. It's almost making Susan seem like a stronger character than she comes off in the movie. The next scene I wanted to talk about is the scene between Ann Norton and her daughter Susan in the kitchen as they're preparing dessert and coffee after dinner. So the whole thing from this, it's a very quick scene in the miniseries, and pretty much it's just, Anne asking Susan what his latest book was about, and Susan says it's about two men, and then she goes, not one of those, and it cuts right from there. From here, though, it actually goes on a bit longer. After she says not one of those, Susan says, well, it's beautifully written, and Anne's like, oh, I'm sure it goes into a lot of detail, and they go back and forth, and Susan's mother brings up Ned Tebbets, saying, you could do a lot worse. He's bought some land with Larry Crockett, and Susan's getting upset with her, and Anne's like, well, women have to be practical. And then she goes back to saying, about Ben's book, and Anne is like, well, I'm not going to read it, and she says, I'm teasing you. It's about a man and a woman. And so there it just shows that, again, the scene in the park, the scene in the kitchen with her mom, it just shows that Susan has a little bit more edge to her in the script than how Bonnie Bedelia portrayed her in the finished product. The other thing I like about this takes place during the dinner scene at the house, and it's right after the scene in the kitchen with Anne and Susan, is that you see Ned Tebbets actually drive by the house and he sees Ben's car. So that Ned was kind of spying on what was going on. The next scene that stuck out to me is the drive that Susan and Ben go on after dinner, the one where she said, let's go to the lake. But prior to that, they start talking about Ned, and then you find out a little bit more about their relationship. And Susan goes into details about that. He was high school, he was a BMOC, 3-letter man, football, basketball, and hockey. Ben, asked her if she was a cheerleader, and she said she was. And he asked her, did she twirl a baton? And she said, I still can. Want a demonstration? Again, showing a little bit of edge to Susan. And when they were actually at the lake, and of course they embrace, it goes into a little detail about that. It says, Ben looks at her. This woman is very direct. And for a moment his guard is up, and then he lets it happen. They embrace. Really, it begins to happen, because a car crunches around the curve in the dirt road, its headlights catching them. They look back at the headlights, startled. The headlights go out, leaving us in darkness. So obviously Ned had followed them to the lake, which I thought was kind of cool, and there's parts of me that wish that would have been in there still. The next scene that really stuck out to me is at the school. So we never see Susan in her classroom. We only see her leaving school, and that's when Ben meets up with her after seeing Jason Burke and everything. And that's, of course, where she has her confrontation with Ned. And that's the first time we're introduced to Ned Tebbets. But here there's actually a much longer scene where Ned actually approaches her in her classroom. So, just to give a little exposition, it says, a bell rings, kids debounce into corridor, moving against the tide is Ned Tebbets. He enters a classroom. Susan looks up from some papers she has been gathering, tidying up. What a surprise, what an unpleasant surprise, because Ned doesn't come to visit her, and this must be about something. And he's like, just to see you, and she's like, what's going on? And he asks her where she went last night, and she's like, you have no right to ask me that. And he's like, I don't have to ask, you were at the lake. And she was like, this is a small town. And she's like, we'll talk about it later, because kids start coming into the classroom. And he's like, I'll wait for you after school. I'll wait outside. There's a little bit more dialogue between, just a very small amount of dialogue between Ned and Susan as they meet after school as well. He says, you love me. You said it. And she said that was 100 years ago. And he says, what the hell happened when you got back from New York? And then he looks at Ben, and she's like, it's not him, has nothing to do with this. And then, of course, he says, you were doing something up at the lake. And then she goes, oh, please, that scene. And then he says, I'll get him. And she yells at Ned, and before she can say anything else, he's already gotten into his van and leaves. So there's, like I said, it's kind of setting up that, you don't really have to have that line, because obviously from his, just his glaring at Ben and the way that he looks at him and sort of grins as he drives off, it pretty much says that without saying it. Some other things that stuck out to me as I read it, there's a scene between when Cully throws the he's supposed in the script he throws a stone at the dog Faithful after Mike and Ned take off in his truck to go get the sideboard. But there's also a scene after that where Ben's getting dressed to go meet with Jason Burke. And then it's a point of view of the Marston house. Ben looks out at the Marston house, and then it goes to the Marston house, and the lights, it says lights are on. Now one of them blinks off, then another. Then exterior Marston house, close angle, night. On Straker as he comes out not through the front door, but through the bulkhead door of the cellar. It is very dark, and we cannot see him clearly. We track Straker to the black Cadillac. As he opens the car door, the interior light shines on him. Momentarily, he is dressed entirely in black. So, of course, that is... And then the next scene is when Faithful is killed in the cemetery. So, obviously, Straker is sort of setting things in motion by killing Mike's dog, and then, of course, kidnapping Ralphie Glick. There is also a scene that takes place at the Custom House Wharf. Now, of course, when we get there in the miniseries, it's right as they're loading the crate onto the lift to get it into the truck, but there's actually more dialogue before that. So it says, the warehouse is almost empty, most of it in the shadow, but light does splash on an upright, large wooden crate with a brown invoice envelope taped to the side. Mike and Ned are staring at it when suddenly Mike leaps into the air, kicking and screaming. And when Ned asks him what it is, he's like, rat, damned rat. And Ned laughs at him. He says, just give him the boot. But it just talks about, there was one line that just really cracked me up. So, Ned opens the envelope that's taped to the side, and Mike's like, what's it say? And Ned says, heroin, 200 pounds. Mike says, give me that. He grabs the invoice, and it just says, sideboard, 1780, Hepplewide, what's that? And Ned's like, kind of antique, let's move it, come on. And so, then it goes into them struggling to get it onto the lift. But actually, the watchman, is like, they're struggling with the crate, and then the watchman says, hey, you all right there? And Mike's like, hey, you want to help us? And the watchman just laughs at him. There's some other banter between Ned and Mike that I really liked, because it just gave a good sense of their character and their relationship as well, because you never understood really much about them other than, Mike called Ned to get him to help him with this job. As they're driving up to the house, it says Mike and Ned peer through the windshield at the house, and Mike says, you see any lights at all? And Ned's like, no, nothing. But Mike goes, creepy place. And then Ned says, you should be used to this, digging those graves and all. And Mike responds with, hey, I do that in the daytime. The next scene that really stands out to me, and Danny Evans, my buddy, actually read this when he got the script in the mail. So it says, exterior Sawyer house, night, fog filter, wind effect. Crockett falls down the steps leading to the front door. He picks himself up, being beyond injury, and dashes for his car. The wind comes up abruptly. Suddenly a hand shoots out, a hand that grows larger and larger, and quickly so, developing into 5 huge claws, ending in long red pointed nails. The hand stops Crockett. Then a figure follows. It's back to camera, a black cloaked figure. Crockett stares in shock as the figure spreads its arms, and the black cloak begins to envelop him, covering his horror-stricken face. But before Crockett can be completely enfolded, he suddenly falls straight to the ground, falls like a stone, falls dead. And this, I really wish they would have kept this the way it was written in the final release. So wide angle, it says, as Danny goes to the window and begins to open it, close window latch. As Danny struggles to open it, the window resists. This tapping becomes more and more incessant, demanding. Danny at window. Finally, with an effort that can only be characterized as supranormal, manages to push open the window. Exterior hospital window, wide night. As Ralphie disappears from sight, a shadow looms on the wall of the hospital. A huge shadow of a man spreading his arms under a cape, slowly blotting out the entire wall, the sinister shadow of Barlow. Interior hospital room, night. Over Danny's shoulder as Ralphie floats toward him, Ralphie, Danny in profile. We move in as Ralphie glides closer to Danny. Over shoulder on Ralphie, the brothers embrace, and Ralphie's head sinks towards Danny's neck. The back of Danny's head blocks camera, and all is obscure. All is dark as Barlow's shadow outside, and we hear the first of the sucking sounds fade out. And this is actually what would have concluded the miniseries, the first part of the miniseries. So the scenes that take place in Jason Burke's house are a little bit longer here, and I actually really enjoyed these scenes. I wish they could have been. I wish this would have been how it was aired, but again, it could have just been cut down for time. So after Jason gives Mike his pajamas and notices the marks on his neck and tells him, call me in the night if you need anything. So from there, it transitions to Ben writing at night, and then it goes back to Jason in his bed, and he hears something, and you never really, the scene is strange because you never really hear any voices. You hear kind of like very almost muffled sounds that sound like a kid, and it's really eerie the way it's done in the movie, but here in the script it does have Mike talking. And it says, Jason's bedroom night. Jason lies in bed listening to the sounds of his house. He hears the subtle settling of the old house. He hears the clock by his bedside. He hears faint passage of wind outside. And then he hears Mike, voiceover, muffled, "Yes, come in." Jason starts to get out of bed, but the motion arrests itself, a paralysis of dread. He hears the hasp on the guest room window being turned back, then the grind of wood against wood as the window is forced up. Once again, he tries to get out of bed, but the sound of the laughter of a child throws him back like a tangible force. A shuddering groan escapes Jason, and he puts his hands over his face, and then he hears sucking sounds. Now from here, of course, it cuts to the boarding house. Eva tells Ben that he has a phone call and says, "Mr. Burke," and he sounds very upset. But in this version, you hear what Jason is saying. In the movie, you just hear it from Ben's point of view, and you don't hear what Jason is saying. So here it says, "Down the stairs to the wall telephone." Ben says, "Yeah, Jason." And he's like, "Can you come over, Ben, right now?" And just tells him he needs to come over quick. And he's like, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. And he asks if he has a crucifix, a St. Christopher's medallion, anything like that. And then, of course, Ben says, "Well, hell no, I was a Baptist." And Jason just says, "Come fast," and he hangs up. So here, more exposition, more that is not in the final film. It says, exterior, Jason Burke's house, night. As Ben drives up, he sees that every light of the lower floor is lit up. Ben goes up to the walk hastily, but his body indicates tension. The door is opened as he reaches it. Jason is in the doorway, pale, trembling. Jason tells him to come inside. Jason Burke's house, night. It is a modest house full of books and records, the house of solitary. Jason leads the way into the hallway. It says, immediately Jason faces Ben. Ben takes the crucifix out of his pocket, says it's Eva's. Ben's eyes fall on two peculiar items on the hallway table, an old-fashioned clasped Bible and a .38 revolver. He picks up the revolver, and Ben's like, "Hey, is this thing loaded?" And Jason's like, "I don't think it would do any good." And then Ben says, "You look awful. What's up?" And Jason says, "There's a dead man upstairs." And Ben, of course, asks if it's Mike Ryerson, and Jason's like, "Yes, dead." And Ben's like, "Are you sure?" He says, I am in my guts, although I haven't looked in on him. I haven't dared, because in another way, he might not be dead at all. Remember Danny Glick died of pernicious anemia, and Mike fell asleep after burying him and didn't wake up until morning, and you saw Mike. Ben is looking at Jason, and Ben says, "Let's go upstairs and have a look." And he says, "Take this." Jason takes the crucifix, and they start up the stairs. And then, of course, the scene plays out as it does. They discover Mike, realize that there's no pulse. And then it cuts back to Jason's kitchen where they have their conversation. Now, this is a little bit longer from what's in the miniseries. Jason tells him he's been doing reading, that according to folklore, the marks disappear when the victim dies. The marks vanish. And Ben's like, "Well, that's folklore." And Jason's like, "Well, this is real. We have to drive a stake through his heart." And Ben's like, "How do we explain that to a jury?" And sort of from the point where Ben says, "There is something we can do. We can check this all out. Call Dr. Norton. Call the constable." And Jason says, "Yeah, we'll let the machinery take over." From here, it extends a little bit longer where Ben says, "Tell your story as though you never heard a thing last night. Just say you brought Mike back from the Dell because he was feeling sick. I'll back you up. You went in to check on him, couldn't wake him up, and called me." And Jason's like, "That's all?" He goes, "That's it. Don't even tell Bill Norton he's dead." And that's where, of course, he goes, "Not dead." So I like that. It adds a little bit more meat to that conversation. The last portion of the script that I wanted to talk about that really stuck out to me is in the finale when they actually stake Barlow in the basement of the Marston house. So there's a little bit more to this because Barlow actually speaks in this part. It's the only part in the script where Barlow actually talks. So it says a pause, then one of the claws flies up, seizes Ben's wrist. Claw on Ben's wrist. Barlow with incredible force. Let me go. As Ben brings down the hammer again, close on Barlow, a moment of impact. Let me go. Side angle Ben. Again he drives the stake in, below camera range. And again he drives the stake in while Barlow's screams reach a crescendo. Barlow screaming. Ben looking down at Barlow. A sudden gust of noxious wind drives Ben backwards. Ben's hand as the hammer falls from his hand and hits the floor. Over to Ben, onto Barlow, stake in his heart, starts to rise from the coffin. Ben's point of view, Barlow, his face coming towards camera. Close, Ben and Barlow, profile, as Barlow's face rises up to meet Ben's, but suddenly, Barlow falling away from camera into the coffin, and now astonishingly, disillusion begins. Barlow begins to sink back into the coffin, his skin yellowing, blistering, the eyes fade, filming white. Falling in, the flesh peels from the head, revealing the skull. The claws turn skeletal, its fingers clicking like grim castanets. And now, looking up, Ben can see the shapes of the others. Weasel, Ned, Mike, the others crawling out of the root cellar. Ben, to Mark, get out. To the undead advancing towards him. Where's Susan? Where is she? Backing away. We'll be back. For all of you, we'll be back. And he looks down into the coffin, dead. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun putting together. Took a little bit of time, but I really wanted people to sort of get a gist of, you know, what this entailed. And again, it is a shooting script. It is really well done. I believe these are still available on eBay, and if they are, I will put a link down below if people are interested in getting this. I also want to give a big shout out to Sam and his channel. He's rebranded his channel. It used to be called Tabby. Now it's Conglomeration Cat. Link down below. Please support Sam. He's probably one of the kindest human beings I've ever met, and I'm so glad that we're friends, that we met because of Salem's Lot and Danny and his amazing channel, Everything 101. But Sam is a great guy and really a gifted artist, and I want to see his channel do better, because I think there needs to be more people like him on the YouTube platform. Just a good guy all around. And again, link down below, Conglomeration Cat. Please support him. And again, Sam, if you're watching, thank you so much for this amazing gift. I know I've said it about 100 times. And of course, here comes Gomez. So thank you, Sam, for this amazing gift. Thank you, Danny, as well, for your friendship. Salem's Lot Minority, I'm so glad to be a part of this little group of ours. And yeah, this script is amazing. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to check out my video and listen to my thoughts on it, and I hope everyone's doing well, and I promise I'll talk to you again real soon. Take it easy, stay scared as always, and remember, you can do nothing against the master. Peace. Fellow Fright Fiends, just want to say thank you again for supporting BoogeyMan Ben's Horror Zone. If you're brand new to the channel and you haven't yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell notification so you're updated every time I drop a new video. I typically do this once or twice a week with new content. Been doing this for over 11 years, and the horror genre is a passion of mine, and it really means a lot to me that I can share that passion with all of you guys. Thanks so much again for the support, and I'll talk to you again later. Take it easy, stay scared as always.